values that net neutrality values. It's a violation of my freedom of association, for example. You can't decide which ad I see. We even have an Electronic Transactions Act that says that the provider may not interfere with any transmission without lawful authority. And the lawful authority is that they have to get a court order to do that. And our position is that in blocking content, they are actually inspecting content, and it is a violation of law. So this is some of the challenges. The bad thing for us is that the law as it stands now, there's no specific legal recourse, because the laws and the regulations are still a little bit inadequate to meet these kinds of needs.
Is the blocking of spam breaking those attributes?
Well, one man's spam is another man's good content. And again, it is about what it is. And in our view, we do not contest that there are content unregulated or content that people did not request, unrequested, that is bad and it's clogging the internet. But we are very mindful that content regulation in and of itself is a very slippery slope, and it requires a lot more introspection and a lot more collaboration among the various parties to decide what we do with it.
Thank you, Carlton. Mark Covell.
Yes, I just wanted to chip in on spam and how to deal with this. Some people love spam. You know, they they read every email, and perhaps there is some sort of benefit they might derive from that. And for the businesses that are sending stuff out, maybe there is a return on that. But of course, there are other issues involved. The volume of spam can impair network resilience and network efficiencies and so on. And there, in that case, there is valid argument for stepping in and dealing with this as a problem that's affecting everybody's interest. And the other point, coming back on to the issue about business opportunities and content and so on. Of course, e-commerce is a vital aspect of life now. People are shopping increasingly online. Businesses will secure far greater opportunities in a larger number of markets by promoting their products online. And there are technologies that are changing the way services can be delivered. There's Uber, which is revolutionizing how people will get around a city. And that can put governments in a difficult position, because you have the traditional industry pushing back, resisting that, the taxi lobby. You know, so governments have a role, I think, to play in trying to determine the best way forward that ensures fair competition in the delivery of services online, that promotes opportunity, innovation, new kinds of services and goods that the internet will enable consumers to enjoy, while also protecting or softening the blows, if you like, to established industries that are going to be threatened by these unstoppable changes. Governments really need to keep in step with change and handle this in a sensible way.
Thank you, Mark. Paul Wilson, you've submitted some comments on the document that is published. I wonder whether you could share some of those comments with us. Going back in there, is there anything that raised your eyebrow or got you to think I need to respond?
Yeah, some of the comments I made I've repeated here, which I think is that it would be useful to distinguish between the technical features which are part of the internet, which we can agree are essential to distinguish those from the core values as they're being described. Another one, though, is also this the implications behind an absolutist definitive sort of approach to some of these values, because as you mentioned before, it can be a slippery slope to try and apply the end-to-end model, for instance, to every situation. Whereas you said, as we said, there are perfectly good reasons why individuals or companies might want to, service providers might want to want not for that to be a pure and absolutist position. And there are engineering techniques applied throughout the internet that do break a pure net neutrality model and a pure end-to-end model, and they do it for user benefit, for efficiency, for cost effectiveness. Even the idea of a robust and reliable internet, if you take that to its maximum, then you actually have a mil-spec internet, if you like. You have something that becomes extremely expensive, that you take it to its extent. You've got something that's 100% available and robust. Whereas, if you're an engineer, you roll that back to what's called 5 nines or 4 nines or 3 nines in terms of the percentage of uptime that you have. So again, it's the slippery slope thing that I think probably applies to almost all of these, and I think it's where the idea of something that we would sign up to really has to be aspirational, and it has to recognise the conflict between many of the things that we want to achieve. Something occurred to me earlier as well. It actually came out of a discussion earlier in the week about zero rating, and the idea. A question came up as to whether whether zero rated services were more or less like a one-way publication, and really that was the distinction between zero rated service and other. And of course the defender of zero rated services was saying, no, of course not. It's not a one-way service. It's something that you can publish just as easily as receive information. So it's not like a newspaper publication. It's a genuine internet service. But what struck me, what occurred to me then, was that the sort of publication that you're actually after, that I think needs to be looked at and actually was definitely sacrificed in this discussion about a particular zero-rated service model, is the creative aspect, and that's the innovative aspect. And that means that what you're putting on the internet isn't a status update on Facebook. What you're putting on the internet is something that's genuinely new, that's your creation, it's your innovation, it's your invention, and that is not permitted when you have an internet that's restricted to a specific set of services. Because what you need a freely open and accessible internet model. So the question for you, or for this group, is where is the permissionless innovation aspect in these core values? And I think it probably is in there, but again, maybe we'd see it if we actually spelt them out more. Maybe it's in the open value, but a lot of people might miss that the open value here actually includes the ability to innovate, the ability to use an open network to put your own creations out. So yeah, I'd be interested to know, Olivia, whether you actually have considered the permissionless innovation value as part of this. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. I'm not the drafter of the document. I do believe that the coalition is actually fully supporting the permissionless innovation, which is, I think, perhaps the first core value of the internet, the fact that you don't actually need to ask anyone for a license before you get connected or propose content. But you've touched on the zero rating services, and I wondered whether, Kathy, the Internet Society has looked at the topic of zero rating services and what the overall thought was on this. It seems to be a highly touchy issue at the moment, something that this year it's come up. So has there been any discussion?
Well, I think Paul just really talked about what the discussion is about. This is an application of the internet. It's still an internet service. It's being offered as a service, but it is an application, not the whole of the internet. And the issue now is there value to users, of certain users, to this? I suspect there is. We know of people who say this is wonderful for them. It's a different place where they can communicate with people who they otherwise couldn't do. Is it the internet? No. Should we be clear as to what it is? Yes. And I think the concern that any one of us would have that wants to ensure that the whole of the internet is open to everyone is whether there is some way that this person doesn't have the ability to go elsewhere, that they're locked in, that something in the arrangement locks them into not going further. And that, to me, is the area worth conversation, and one that is enormously important, I would think, as we talk about development. Yes. And it's in that respect that we've had the conversation, not in some notion of nefarious kinds of behavior kind of thing. And I think that that's a fair conversation to have and one we need to do.
Captain Samuels?
Yes. Listen, to get to the innovation part, you first have to have access, and you first have to have connectivity, and that costs money. And any scheme, there are various zero rating models, but with respect to connectivity, when in the connectivity agenda and accessibility agenda, any scheme that affords a user to access the internet, you need to look at seriously, and you can't just throw it away. Let me tell you why. I agree it is a service, and I believe that where we come from, any service that enables a user to get online and reduces the cost to get online is useful. We are adamantly clear that you should not advertise it as the internet, and you should not lock in a user so the user cannot go anywhere. In other words, there must be a path to graduation from it. We feel that those things, as long as those principles are adhered to, then we see zero rating as actually one method to get people get online, and that is something that we want to encourage. We don't look at it as a nefarious plot to get people out at all. We see it as just a step that enables access and enables connectivity.
Olivia, I'm going to have to apologize, and I'm going to have to leave the conversation, but I have another appointment I have to go do. So thank you very much for including me.
I was going to ask you one last question, which was received from a remote participant, and that was the question on actually what to do next. And the question here was, would the Internet Society consider inspiring its organizational members to articulate and commit to core Internet values and inspire them to consider formulating their business policy in a manner that the core Internet values are respected?
I think we do that. I think that's what we're all about. That's what. But I'm going to say my but is what Paul has suggested, and that is we need to understand what it is we're talking about, and in most cases, I believe that's what our conversation is about with our members and our chapters and our organizational members, and it's in the implementation of all of the various things that happen on the internet that these values are reflected or not reflected. And I think a conversation about when they're not reflected is as important as when they are reflected. And I think that's exactly where we are in the development of the internet, and I think that's what we ought to keep doing. With that, I do apologize, and I'm going to run off. Okay.
Thank you very much, Kathy. That was the correct answer, and you're now released. Thank you. Okay, the floor is open, by the way, to anyone who wishes to comment here. You're very welcome to take part in the discussion. I don't think it's we have such a crowd that we'll have a queue at the microphones, but if you do wish to comment, please put your hand up or come to one of the mics or use the mics around the table. We're looking at the next steps, and one of the questions which was actually asked on the document itself was, should there be some enforcement of these values? Should they be And indeed, if they were to be enforced, are these values actually enforceable? Any thoughts on this? Paul Whitson? Or Mark? Paul. Let's have Paul Whitson.
I think I've said it. I think the values as they stand here are not enforceable at all. There is not. It's simply there is too much wiggle room. There's definitely too much abstraction in all of this to say that you could enforce on anyone. I don't think you necessarily want to enforce either. As we've said, the absolutist definitive sort of approach is one that's a slippery slope towards prohibiting or sanctioning all sorts of things which are actually good and have all sorts of benefits. I would say, as Kathy did, that as an organisation, though, we can stand for a set of values in principle that is meaningful and real. And APNIC's mission statement is about our vision is of a global, open, stable and secure internet that serves the entire Asia-Pacific community. So we've sort of said it, that's what we're after, and that's somehow something that drives us. ISOC will say it similarly but differently, and I think those of our members who are particularly interested and those of our community who are particularly interested in these things may well be sort of subscribers to both organisations. But that I think is the permissionless, liberal and permissive approach that we want to take, rather than one of requiring compliance and sanctions, unless we're very, very, very careful in doing that. So again, I would only step anywhere towards kind of trying to sign up formally if we had a lot more specifics about what is actually being asked for here, and I'm not sure what they would be, to the extent that they could be sort of agreeable.
Thanks, Paul. Mark Carvel?
Yes, thanks, Olivier. Interesting question. In purely practical terms, I don't see how you could actually enforce core values of this nature in a global manner. It doesn't seem possible. Immediately you ask, well, who is going to do the enforcing? And as Paul was hinting, also what kind of sanctions regime are you going to have to construct for not adhering to these core values? I think that's the wrong approach to take. You are seeing these values and others related to them articulated as principles in many of the outcomes of key discussions, including those involving governments. I mean, these principles are pretty much, if not fully, but in principles related in a very similar way. In going back to the Tunis Agenda of 2005, we're seeing many of these elements also appearing in the current negotiation text in New York. In Council of Europe documents relating to internet governance and rights, you're seeing reassertions of the importance of an open and free internet, which is accessible by all, and so on. So I think it's important to ensure that these values and others that we haven't considered, it's not an exhaustive list, embedded in the outcomes of discussions and events like the IGF and so on, in outcome documents coming. I think it's always important to reassert these core values in that way, and then, well, from a government perspective, you then proceed to make recommendations that are consistent with those core values. That's the approach to take, I think.
Mark, as a follow-up, would governments be interested, or be even likely to say yes to something like a document with signatories and adhering to core values?
I think that kind of process would be very difficult to manage. It will be a negotiation process. It will take forever, and you'd have horrendous arguments as to defining what is global, even. So it certainly wouldn't be the kind of thing you'd have states signing up to in a sort of traditional multilateral convention-based way.
I hear from my left side from Carlton that you think that's probably
Well,
absolutely right.
I agree with Mark. Just going through the definitions alone would take about 3 years. So I don't think it's something government. But certainly going back to what Apnick said, you could see them as aspirational, values, and you could always put them, just like you say, it's in your, if you look at your values that you put in or how you see yourself in relation to your customers and so on. Most of these are captured in that, in your vision statement, your mission statement. Most of these are captured, so they're aspirational. And I think it's the best you can expect right now, given the mix of stakeholders that you'd have to go through.
I think that Kathy earlier referred to them as aspirational attributes. Paul?
I didn't come. I've never attended this session with the idea that the intention was to finally get to something enforceable. And so, I mean, the best we can do is not that, and that's for good reason, because it would be not better to at all, in my view, to sort of be advancing towards something something enforceable. And I also don't want aspirational to be seen as a second best either. I think there's more to it than that, in that I think by being, as I've suggested, more specific about what technical features we're looking at here and how they link quite specifically to the different values, that we can say that we are interested to maximize these things, to maximize the value that's there, which is not by enforcing absolutely the thing that makes the value possible, but it's about interpreting and stating that value as something that actually can be maximized, and then agreeing that that's what we want to do. But you can't exactly commit yourself absolutely and in a enforceable way to maximizing anything. That's where it becomes, if not perhaps aspirational, but also just something that's not able to be defined and enforced in that way, and we don't want to do that, and that's a feature, not a bug or a failure.
Thank you, Paul. One more question that came in remotely, and that was as follows, and it's towards you, Mark. As governments who value this, let me just retrack again. As earlier users of the internet and first participants of the internet evolution, Europe and USA have a deeper understanding of the core internet values and about the multi-stakeholder process. As governments who value this better, what work is being done by the UK and European governments and the United States multilaterally to disseminate the merits of the multi-stakeholder process of internet governance and core internet values, ministerial or even at higher levels than the ministerial levels?
Thanks. A lot is happening, actually. The UK government is very active in all international fora where internet governance and the sustainability of the multi-stakeholder model is under discussion. For example, in ICANN, we engage with the community alongside many other governments. The Governmental Advisory Committee has now a membership of 155 governments. And we are all advocating how the multi-stakeholder model, as demonstrated by ICANN, can evolve and improve and build on success. We do this multilaterally with other governments at ministerial level and at official level to discuss how we can advance the multi-stakeholder model, ensure that governments have the capacity to engage effectively. Many governments have not got that facility, which we in Europe we take for granted, the ability to draw on the policy expertise that will help develop discussions at the multilateral level and also in multi-stakeholder fora. And in the UN now, I mean, we are engaging with many governments on how to advance the information society and the contribution that the internet makes to the information society beyond 2015, how to build on the achievements of the last year under the WSIS, the World Summit on Information Society outcomes of the last 10 years and the implementation of those, and support sustainable development. So the intersect with the Sustainable Development Goals, which have just been agreed, is very important. We talk to other governments about how we can best realize the contribution that the internet and the information society in general can make to sustainable development. So there's a lot of dialogue going on at official level, at international level. We have a European group on internet governance where the officials meet from all the member states of the EU. That is a very regular occurrence. So a lot going on.
Thanks, Mark. And as we reach the final 2 minutes or last minute of this meeting, 30 seconds on your... Oh, we have Aisha Hassan.
Aisha Hassan from the Internet Society. Very briefly, I just wanted to say this was a very useful conversation, and I wish that there had been more people to benefit from it, but that is, you know, the way it goes at the IGF. Sometimes the most dynamic conversations don't get the most of an audience. But I do hope that you'll capture some of the very important viewpoints that were expressed so that others can benefit from it afterwards.
Thank you very much, Aisha. And let's go into Carlton Samuels. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Olivier. As I tell you, in the Caribbean space, the internet is central to economic and social development. At the core of it, our most important high priority is access and connectivity. In terms of access and connectivity, the values of the internet, some of these core values are relevant and aspirational. Our intention is to have each of us connected to all of us. And for doing that, we need a global internet that is open and everybody connected to everybody else. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlton. Paul Wilson?
I think this has been very interesting. I very much appreciate Aisha's comments. I think the value is in the process and not the product. And I think part of the process is to be able to articulate more and more clearly and to share more and more widely an understanding of the things that we take for granted or are at risk of taking for granted, the things that make the internet, and what are the potential risks to those things, or what are the trade-offs, what are the factors that can maximize those aspects of the internet that we take for granted, and make sure that we actually don't sacrifice more than we intend to by doing any particular action or activity on the net. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Mark Carvell?
My final comment, I think, is that it's incumbent on all stakeholders to work together in a truly cooperative and global way, and this is why the IGF is such a valuable forum for facilitating that, because what the internet potentially has and is delivering in many parts of the world, sadly not all parts of the world, is enhanced quality of life for citizens. That means the ability to improve their economic and social well-being, enhancing their ability to express themselves, to impart information, and to receive information. That's our common goal here, and these values are important in ensuring that we have the right approach to the governance of the internet to realize that key objective, which every government should have as a key priority.
Thanks very much for these wise words. And just building up on what Aisha has said, this is being recorded. This is actually also being streamed. I'd like to thank Jolie McPhee for performing some of the wonderful work that he does in streaming this out to the wider world as well. So thanks to all of our panelists here. I'd like a quick round of applause. And certainly we will be building on this, and I think we should continue the discussions on the mailing lists and continue building on these core values. With this session is adjourned. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.